Sweet.
Yeah.
Great to see everyone. Welcome back to, I guess we've had a couple weeks off here while you've been off writing and cranking away. And so we are now starting the process of actually like pulling all this stuff together. And remember at the very beginning, I sort of said like, trust the process, this whole thing will work. Part of what we've been trying to do is basically create a whole bunch of words, a whole bunch of like ideas of interviews and content, stuff like that. So we can really start what we're going to do now. Really between now and the middle of February, we're going to pulling all this together into your book manuscript. And this process, once you've completed this process, you will be different than like 98% of people, right? Like most people who start books never ever get to the point where they have a first draft manuscript, and we're going to get you there. So that's kind of what the goal of this next little period of time is to do, is to go through that process. So I'm going to run through a couple of things sort of fairly quickly. And then basically we're going to spend some time actually creating some of the documents that we're going to be doing over the next bit of time. But, you know, again, I know many of you are still like writing and creating and trying to, you know, Carson's getting 6,000 words today. So kudos, Carson. But yeah, today we're going to sort of like just spend a little bit of time trying to, you know, come with your first like look at what your structured book would look like. And then we'll sort of run it from there. So let me open this my slides here for you a little bit. All right. So here we are. We are in week, you know, we're in this process as we've been doing all along the way. And we are, you know, basically we're still, you know, trying to help you all get a book published June 2019. So we're on the track in that sort of way. And as I've said all along, and what's been really neat to see, and I had the conversations with most of you, is that you just are developing expertise. And that's kind of the exciting part of all of this, is like the knowledge you're gaining from your book is really helping you, you know, learn those things. And so going back to what I said, you know, early in September, is like this whole process is helping position you as an expert. And so if you remember, like this whole idea here is that there's sort of these three parts that we talked about: the interviewing you're doing, all the learning from there, the stories you're writing, and the contribution. So we're really going to be spending sort of the next 6 to 7 weeks or so developing this contribution for you to help you make sure that it's not just a collection of stories, but it's really something that kind of is a book in that way. So yeah, so basically a couple things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to spend just a quick minute hearing how everyone's doing. I'm going to sort of lay out kind of what's coming in the second semester for you guys a little bit. And then we're going to start to talk about how we're going to go from your stories into a manuscript. And then we'll start to lay out this kind of document that is sort of the template book structure that you got in book models. And then we'll rock it from there. So yeah, so why don't we maybe do a quick, you know, around the horn, hearing from everyone how it's going. So Carson, maybe you want to direct traffic.
Yeah, I'll call people out just in the order I see them. So we'll start with Sierra.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's going pretty well. I'm like spent the past few days. I printed out all my poems and just like collecting them into, I'm going to do the like divide them by playlists. So like songs that are like super personal that relate to the poems. So I've been like choosing songs, choosing the order of the poems, and like I just started to put them under like the structuring. So I still have like 2 more sections to go, but otherwise like pretty good.
Cool.
Awesome. Great. Well, I'll go to Peyton next.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Good.
So far, so good with me. I'm at 11,000 words, about
Nice.
11,000 words right now. So I've just kind of scheduled about 2,000 a day, but now I'm going to have to crank it up a little bit and do like 3,000 a day. And I think it'll go well. So far, so good. And I'll see you on January 1st with hopefully 20,000 words.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Maggie.
Hey guys, I'm like
It's really
super
comfy.
stressed. It is really. I got it for Christmas. I'm like super stressed. I have 8,000 words, but I think if I really sit down and like no distractions, like can really finish it out. Ended up getting a lot of words from some cool essays that I wrote for school this year that I realized could actually be contributing to the book. So yeah, should be good. A little nervous, a little stressed, but I think it's normal. So
it's normal. It's a good kind of stress too. It's actually that sort of like, you know, it's like I'm doing this, so it's good.
Yeah. No, it's fine. Next we'll go to Julia.
Hi. So everything's going pretty well right now. I'm really excited. I have about 26,000 words, but the problem that I'm really worried about is that I don't have the stuff that I need. So it's a lot of stories and stuff that's really going to help the book. But then there's so many new ideas. I'm actually in the middle of an interview right now. My friend came to visit and I've been asking her questions on vulnerability. So we're here together right now, but it's been going well. It's really fun. It's probably the best thing I've ever done.
Cool.
Awesome. Great. Now I'll go to Udit.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so I'm at like around 30,000 words right now. Yeah, I've been home for a while, so it's been pretty easy to just like sit down and like crank these stories out with like really no distractions. So like that's been nice. But I was like looking forward, like I still really haven't used a lot of my primary interviews, which I spent like a lot of time like organizing. So like I think looking forward, like I'm gonna try to like find a place in the book to fit those in. So I mean I think I'm in a good spot though. Like I'm happy with the weather.
And that's some of the stuff that we'll be doing next week too. We'll talk about, like you said, you may have, holes and stuff like that. Like, again, not all of you will have everything done that you want to get done yet, which is totally natural. So one of the things we'll talk about is like, where do you plug those pieces in? But yeah, absolutely. That's a good place to be.
Yeah, geez, sounds like some of you are doing awesome in the workout. It's great. Next we'll go to, it's crazy. Next we'll go to Alex.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. So I'm still a little stressed with the whole process, but I've been putting in about 1,500 words a day the last couple of days. So
Nice.
Hoping to get to 20,000 by January 1st still, or a few days after. It's been stressful, but a really good process. I think the structure is kind of fleshing itself out for me, just kind of how the flow of ideas are kind of coming from the start to the finish. So I'm feeling pretty good with that so far.
Good.
Great. All right, then we'll go to Allie.
Hi, yeah, so I definitely don't have 30,000 words. That's really impressive.
I don't either, so you're okay.
Yeah, so I've set aside some time these last couple of days in particular to really pick up the pace and start cranking out some more stories. So that's been good. I've written most of the stories from my primary interviews. So I think I just have to like go back and add a few secondary interviews in and that kind of thing. And I've been keeping notes for myself on like emerging themes and things like that, like how things could potentially tie together. So I think that's been helpful.
Great. Yeah. All right, then Kelsey.
I am not stressed on word count. I'm at around 13,500. I know that I'll get to 20,000. I'm a fast writer. I'm just a slow thinker. So it's just a matter of figuring out exactly what I'm going to write, and then I can get the word count out. But that's been my main struggle in like the past couple of days, is just figuring out the secondary interviews. I wrote all my primary, and like as soon as I have the content, it's easy to write out. It's just kind of figuring out and narrowing down exactly where I want to go with it. So in the next couple of days, I know I'll get there. It's just kind of figuring out where I'm going with it.
Yeah, great. And then I guess I have mine around the horn. I've been very productive the last day or so. Like I've had some time to myself. I've like cranked out like 6,000 words. I don't even know how, but I've gotten to like 14,000. So yeah, I mean, yeah, don't be stressed about the word count. I didn't even realize I was writing that much. It just kind of like flowed out. So yeah, but yeah.
It's good. Well, yeah, you're all doing great. I mean, again, I would tell you that whether you're at 8,000 Maggie or you're at like 30,000, it's sort of, again, the reality is that all of you are like creating knowledge and it's getting words on the paper. And like the key part of it is like, to your point, like being able to pull pieces from different places to get together. Because what we're going to be doing now really is, it's more like what's going to be happening is assembling a manuscript as opposed to writing it. Again, one of the biggest, most terrifying things is to say, I'm going to write a book, when you sort of have to start from zero and try and write the whole thing. Well, you've just been creating a bunch of stories so that you're going to have a whole bunch of stuff to fill in. And whether you have to keep writing, creating more content along the way is fine. But again, the average target for most of us is going to be trying to get to about a 32,000, 30,000 plus or so word manuscript eventually. So again, basically over the next 8 weeks or so, you're going to keep creating content to get even more along the way. And a lot of that's going to come from stitching it together. So yeah, it's great. I think this is exciting. And as you saw, like you can create a ton of words in a short window of time, especially because you've been learning. I was really surprised that Brian shared that he created like 24,000 words in 3 days. And I was like, what is wrong with you? But it's again, it's just once you have the knowledge and you sit down and you're like, deadlines drive us to do a lot of crazy things. So yeah, you guys will all get that, which is exciting. So, so let me take you through a couple things here that we're going to be talking about. So couple big things for you guys a little bit is like what's coming up, this semester. So what we're going to be doing next week, end of next week or so, is pre-approving to you. So we have a publishing board that I've shared with you. New Degree Press has a publishing board. One of the guys on it is Daniel, who's the former CEO of Lonely Planet, the biggest publisher in the world. So I've been dripping him some pieces from all you guys. And he's really excited about, the publishing board we have is really excited about some of the work you guys are doing. So I think all of you are exactly where we'd hope you to be. So we'll give you that. Those sort of notice soon. And again, usually what happens if you're a little bit behind, whatever, you'll just catch up over the next bit of time. Approval stage, it's about 25,000 words of a full manuscript or 20,000 words of stories. So either of those two places, now or in mid-February, you'll be in the perfect place that we want you to be there. We'll also then start now kind of talking about how you turn these words into that manuscript. And a lot of this kind of building of the manuscript is what we'll be doing over the next kind of 3 weeks or so together. So you don't really need to be worrying too much about it, but like in terms of like come to the sessions, create some of the pieces that we're going to be using, and this will be what we build into your actual manuscript. We're going to talk about some of the pre-marketing content that we're going to be doing. Part of it, now that you've sort of got this placed, it's almost, good. You've got, content down, you've got, basically the formings of a book. We're going to help you do some video content to sort of share that you're in this process. We'll talk a little bit more about the book starter process, which is super cool. We actually have, sort of interesting. One of our advisors for you guys in the book starter is actually the son of the guy who cured polio. So if you know Jonas Salk, the guy who cured polio, which is super crazy thing. But anyway, his son is helping us with some of the book starter work that we're doing. So super cool stuff. I think you guys will like it. Carson met him, and afterwards I told him, he's like, hey, this guy's dad cured polio. He's like, what? So
yeah, I mean, anyway, it's so random. I was like, what the heck? It's awesome.
Yeah, basically, like he's credited with like saving hundreds of millions of life from his work. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. We're going to start some work, a little bit more work on covers. So you'll be starting doing your cover design work, which is awesome. We'll be working on revisions and then advanced reader feedback. So you'll be sending out pieces of your book to people in the spring semester. We'll be working on laying out the book, and then we'll be designing our launch and marketing plan. So right now at the back half of June is when we're going to be scheduling to do your book launch in New York City together. And then we'll also be doing something pretty cool with each of you is we'll be doing a second kind of launch for those of you that want to do an audiobook over the summertime. You'll be doing kind of a book and audiobook launch on your campus in September. So we'll be talking a little bit about audiobooks. And if you want to spend more time over the fun with this group here, we'll be talking about some of those pieces. So that's kind of what's coming. One of the things for sure that I would recommend to all of you is if you haven't yet sort of talked to a professor about getting credit for the spring semester, please do. You're doing the work that it's required to do to get any kind of credit. So you should definitely get college credit for it. I know Carson's been doing it. Brian Bees has done it. Like there's a bunch of people who've done it already. So if you have questions on that stuff, just please ping Carson, ping me. And what I typically will do for most people, I think it was with Allie, if the professor asks like, hey, tell me a little bit more about this one, I'll have you to talk to your professors about it. They're usually blown away by the quality of work that you guys do in this process. So if you're doing it already, you should definitely get credit for it on that front. So any quick questions on kind of what's coming here in the spring semester at all? I think most likely right now, I think the schedule is going to be the same, where we do Sunday nights and Mondays, unless Carson sort of changes it. But for now, that's sort of the plan at this point. But any questions from folks on kind of what's coming up here on these epic things we're starting to get done here?
Yeah, I have two quick questions, if that's
Sure.
okay. First, like with asking a professor for credit, like I saw on the layout or whatever you gave us in Quip, like saying like not telling them what we've already done, like how do you think we should approach it now? Because like the spring semester is like going to start like in a month or so, for me at least.
It's still the same thing, right? I think you've been writing a bunch of stories and now you want to turn it into a manuscript, a book manuscript. So I think you're doing that one, you're gonna be doing marketing around it. So again, I would sort of tell them like, listen, I've been doing all this research and stuff like that. I actually want to see if I can make this into a manuscript. And so, I'm going to write a bunch of words, I'm going to pull it together into chapters and do marketing on it. So I don't think it really has to change all that much based on what you've done, because you've really been doing a lot of research and pre-writing, and now there's still a whole big bunch of work to be done from, what you're going to start doing. Basically the start of the semester is like pulling it into a first draft manuscript, revisions of it all along. So by the end of sort of, finals time, you'll be submitting sort of a manuscript with chapters, and you'll be submitting some marketing material behind it. So again, I don't think you have to really, it's not that not tell is, I guess, the way to say it, but I would say you mostly don't need to sort of say, get too much into the weeds of exactly what you sort of have yet to do, but mostly to say, I want to submit a manuscript that I think I'd like to publish as you're finished.
And I guess like for me, as someone who's like not a Georgetown student, like would it be helpful to mention that like you have been helping me with this?
Yeah.
Cool.
I would say, yeah, hey, listen, been working with this Georgetown professor. And I would just sort of tell the story of how this thing happened, like I had a friend, it's like just, I think professors are happy to help you with something, tackling something of this bit of the heft. And the more credibility to say is like, listen, I've been working with a professor on it, and I'd love your help to get it to the next stage. They'll be super supportive of it.
Okay. And then I don't want to monopolize our time, but like what happens if we don't reach 20,000 by the first?
Oh, don't worry about it. That's just a target for you. Again, the goal is to get as many words down as possible. What the biggest reason we have these word count targets is we want to make sure that when you publish your book, it has enough heft behind it. There's publishing something under about 25,000 words feels a little pamphletty. So the word count targets for us is to eventually, we want you to get to a finished version really by the end of by May timeframe of about 30,000 words. So these targets are sort of like, 20,000 words is a target for you to hit to by January 2nd or whatever it is, sort of for this pre-approval step. So that means like you're ready to go. We know that you're going to get there. 25,000 words is sort of the next target milestone by about sort of I guess it's the 15th or something like that of February. So you got plenty of time, but this step is sort of what we call the pre-approval step. That way we'll review it, the publishing board will review it, and you'll basically get approved to sort of say, yeah, we're going to publish this thing. Or we'll say, hey, you're close. Keep doing these sorts of things. We believe you're on track anyways.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions at all? All right, cool. So let's kind of like dive in here to the actual like meat of what's going to be happening for you guys. So all of you are working right now on your manuscript phase. And this phase really is designed to kind of help you create your first book. And so we do this in a very different way than a lot of people, right? We basically think about assembling a manuscript as opposed to writing a manuscript. Imagine if I said to sit down here and write a 30,000 word book, it would like be crazy. But like you've just been writing all these pieces all along, doing interviews and collecting content. Now we're going to sort of assemble this all into your manuscript. So that's what we're going to be doing, is going from these stories that you have into this flow one. And all of this stuff, to Maggie's question a little bit, like what if I don't have 20,000 words yet? Should I not do this or should I stop it all? Again, these are run in parallel to continue to create stories. So if you're at 12,000 words, yes, still start this sort of stuff. If you're at 2,000 words, still start this stuff. It's really designed as a way for you to kind of like plug in the structure. So we're going to be, if you think about it in this way, we basically are building a house, right? That's kind of what you're doing. Think of your manuscript as a house. And so what you've sort of been doing for the last, few months together is building the bricks and the wood. That's kind of what you've been going out and doing, is all these raw materials. Now that we're at this point right here, we can look at all the things we've learned and say, all right, like, what do I think the structure of this house is going to be? Is it going to be, a rambler? Is it going to be a 2-story thing? What's it going to look like? So what you're going to be doing together over the next sort of 3 or 4 weeks is we're going to basically frame out the house. And then what you're going to do is you're going to basically take all the bricks and woods you've been building in stories and then mash it onto that sort of frame. What that allows us to do is, if you set out to build a rambler at the start and you get this way and you're like, oh gosh, like this isn't what I wanted, you have to tear it down and start over. We don't have to do that. You've just been building bricks and woods. And now what you're going to do is you're going to basically figure out the frame that you have. Like, how do you want your book to look, to feel, to sound? And you're going to have stories that you're going to plug onto that structure. So that's kind of what this way will work in this sort of way. So again, if you think about what we've been doing, these 3 parts are what help you define expertise. We've really been focusing on your interviews and your stories. So now you got a bunch of both. The last thing that we're going to be doing now is figuring out how we make this into a contribution. How do we basically contribute something that people are saying like, wow, Kelsey, really, she's really smart, or gosh, Allie really has made something that helps me understand something better. That's kind of the third part of it. And that's really what we're going to pull together over the next sort of 6 to 7 weeks. This is where me and your developmental editor are going to be helpful to you guys, because we're going to be kind of helping you hone your structures, understand your chapter layout, and then pulling this into this first draft manuscript. So it'll be different than you may have thought it is, but we're going to help you in some ways kind of paint by numbers a little bit as we go. So here's what you've probably got. You've got a bunch of stuff. You've got interview notes. You've got, things, stories you've written, things that are half done. You got a bunch of stuff, and that's exactly what I want you to have. Think of all this content you've got as your bricks and wood, right? That's what you've got. Now, the key thing I want you to keep doing is I want you to keep adding this sort of stuff into your story index. Take all these pieces here, whether they're finished or not, and mash them all in here, because I think this is what we're going to use to really start to frame out what we've got in our hands. So put everything you got, even if it's not finished yet, just shove it in here so we have it. So as we're like organizing what we have, you have a running total of it. So again, think of this sort of story index as basically your inventory of all the things that you've got. And again, whether you've written them yet, or you've outlined them yet, or they're just some notes, put them all in there, because we're going to use them when we actually assemble your manuscript. So that's one of the key things to do. Now, the core thing to understand here, and I put this in the video, but I want to walk through it with all you guys so you can see it and kind of hear it live. Here's the process that we're going through, right? Number one, you've got a bunch of words, wherever they are. They may not be finished stories yet, but they may be interview notes, they may be research. All this stuff is what you've got. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be starting to turn this into a draft structure. What do we think the table of contents is going to look like? So that's really what we're going to be doing today. From there, we're going to basically take that structure and apply all the stories you have to it. So we basically can lay out, okay, great, like here's a basic structure. Let me see where I would have plugged these things in to maybe see what it would look like. And then from there, what we'll be doing is basically we'll be breaking it into these sorts of pieces here where we're going to lay out a draft chapter that I'm going to teach you how to do next week. And then from there, we're going to basically bring this whole thing together into an introduction. So this is sort of the process and kind of the timeline. Here's where we are today. What we're going to be doing this week, this sort of next week or so, is like pulling together this draft sort of initial manuscript structure document that we'll work on today. Then you'll be sort of creating that draft chapter next week with me, and then you'll be doing your draft intro the following. So those are kind of the three key things that we're going to be doing. So really think about this as the frame of the house. That's what we're doing. We're framing the house with these three pieces: the draft structure, the draft chapter, and the draft intro. Those are the three pieces that will frame out what this whole thing looks like. Then we'll start to apply stuff to it, organize it, and voila, you'll have a first draft manuscript. So that seems crazy, right? How in God's name can I get from where I am today into a first draft manuscript by mid-February? That sounds ridiculous. Well, promise you can. You're on track and you'll all get there, even if you don't have as many words written yet, because you've been learning, and all this stuff is designed to help you get there no matter what. So just no matter where you are, make an attempt at it, because again, these three pieces are foundational to make sure that you can go from, even if you have, a handful of thousands of words all the way to like a 25,000 word manuscript, you'll see this process will help you get there much, much faster. So again, if you don't have all the words you yet want, fine. You can have some words and they're still great. Still try to put together a draft structure. You don't need to have words written yet to do a structure of it. You just need to have the knowledge that you have. We're going to basically, if you have the structure, you can take your story outlines and still use those too. So you still don't have to have all that yet. And again, in the first week, we're only going to create one draft chapter. So if you have something that's close to done or the most stories in something, we'll just use that as our tool. And the introduction doesn't really require anything else. So all this process here doesn't require you to do stories. So you can continue writing stories even if you're sort of working on these structured pieces the next 3 weeks. So this is really the design of what we're going to be doing. Again, and it works whether you've got all of your words done or whether you've got some of your words done or anywhere in between. It's designed to sort of work flexibly in that way. So the goal here for us is to basically create the structure and then keep filling it in until we can get to about that, sort of eventually we want to have a 30,000 words ready to go manuscript that we're going to publish, but we got kind of milestones. 20,000 words of story is about a good target. 25,000 words first draft is a pretty good target there. And then eventually a finished draft of about 30,000 words with some help along the way. So you're all in where I'd hope you to be. What we're going to do is kind of create the structure and then fill in all the holes as we go along the way. So, all right, so I'll pause there really quickly and then we'll kind of talk about this a little bit further. But
I think you just cut out, Eric.
Questions on, anyone have any sort of questions on the sort of structure that we're going after here? No? Okay. So let me see if I can get my headphones just really.
You still hear me? Yes?
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay, got it. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Maybe I'm just going to take these out for now. All right, so, all right, so we'll keep going.
I don't think we can hear you anymore. I think it might be your network or something. You're frozen on my screen. I don't know about you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, same for me.
Yeah, still frozen, Eric.
Oops.
Oh, there you go. You're good now.
Frozen now. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're good.
All right. Sorry, my internet connection got saved. All right, so let me go back to it. Here we go. All right. So, all right. So here's what we're going to be doing today. Is we're going to basically spend the back half of this one sort of developing your book structure itself. So, what most of you have seen, I think you've hopefully seen and let me just sort of share this document with you and Quip here really quickly, is that we've got basically this template document that each of you are going to start to fill out today. So this is sort of our folder here, obviously. If you go into our sessions, which hopefully this will let me into, you'll see that there's a document here that once it loads called Template Manuscript Initial Structure. So I'm going to quickly walk you through it, and then I'm going to sort of talk about some of these pieces a little bit, and then we're going to spend most of the time going through it, and I'm going to kind of be here to answer questions for you. But this is basically the document you're going to do. Now, the edits are disabled, so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to copy this document just like this. So copy a document of it, and you're going to put this in your folder. So for me, I'm going to just call this Eric Custer, and I'm just going to copy it into my folder for now. And so this is really the document that we're going to be filling out together. So I'm going to walk through it, and I'm going to go through some slides on it just a little bit here. But let's see if this eventually loads for me. So again, make sure each of you copy this, and we'll sort of spend some time today laying some of these pieces out a little bit. The design of this document is really meant to give you basically like a first pass at what your sort of table of contents will be. So what I want each of you to sort of do over the next sort of like 4 or 5 days is take a stab at this and then tag me and your developmental editor on it, because we're going to basically go through and give you some feedback on it. So again, the idea here is to sort of answer some questions like, who's the primary audience? So write some answers here about like, listen, I think this should go after, you know, I'm writing this book for students, or I want to write this book for people who are physicians, or I want to write this book for, who are the people that you think would be the best readers? Now again, the way I would think about that is if you got 100 copies of this book, who would you mail them out to? Think of that as the primary audience. Then I want you to think about, all right, like, why are they going to read this book? Do they want to read this book because it's going to help them make more money? It's going to help them get more time, be happier, have less fear? What is the big thing that you think that this book will help them solve? What's the sort of the answer that they're picking this book up for what? I want you to write kind of like a 2 to 3 sentence, like, what's the bigger idea here? I want this book to be about what? Kind of summarize that sort of thing. And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of the structure. What's the way that you want to teach people through it? And then the next piece here is the book model. What is the book that you want this to be like? Like, for example, when I wrote my recent book, I said I want this to be a little bit like a mixture of give and take, and I want this to be a mixture of sort of grit. Those were the two things together. So who are the books that you want to model this on? And then lay this out in terms of like, what does the structure look like? So typically a book is going to have an introduction, a conclusion, and these parts, which are sort of the bigger themes of your book, and then a series of chapters underneath each one. So you're going to basically lay this out in this way. This is basically the document that I want you guys to work on over the next 4 or 5 days. And sometime next Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, sort of tag me on, what do you think the structure of your book will look like? Who's the audience? What's that they want to solve? What's the big idea here? The book structure, the book models, the table of contents. I'm going to go in and basically give you some feedback on these ones, but this is sort of going to help you structure your book in a way of what this could look like in that sort of way. So we'll be kind of spending some time going through it. And so I'm going to talk about a few things, and then you're going to have some time to kind of work on this and ask me questions as we go along the way for today's session. So let me walk you through kind of some of these key pieces, how to go through this process here. All right, so a couple things just to think about, right? There's these concepts in that you see kind of like themes. And I would say themes are the way to think about, they're like, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 kind of like big concepts that you would love to cover. Maybe that's to say, you know, you want to break that down in terms of like time periods, like in the past, in the present, in the future. That could be themes. You could do it to say, I want to have it for parents, for children, and for something else. You could have it be for, you know, countries, whatever those sorts of themes are. They're like, if you describe the book, what are the bullet points you would say? Yeah, there's like 3 big things I want to cover in my book, X, Y, and Z. Those are what you would call parts. The next thing underneath it is you might have kind of a core set of lessons. So yeah, under this one, you know, I want to break it into like these 3 key things, and those chapters will fit underneath the parts. And the stories are all the things you've written, they'll fit underneath it. So that's kind of how this will be structured a little bit. Themes are like, again, typically the 2 to 4 big ideas that you want to make sure you cover in your book. The lessons are kind of like I want to teach these kind of specific things underneath it. And then the chapter, and the chapters, the stories are what you've written, how that sort of plugs into it. So again, one of the big things that I want you to think about is when you're actually structuring your book, what you're going to see is that I want you to steal liberally. What I mean by that is don't feel like you have to like invent some magical structure. Find books you like and use them. I stole liberally, structurally from each and every one of these books. Give and Take, Grit, Start with Why, and Choose Yourself. All of them I use elements of how they were structured, how they organize their chapters, the parts and stuff like that. No one would look at my book and say like, oh gosh, like Eric copied Grit, because I didn't copy it. I just used those structural elements to help me. And I used a lot of the Start with Why introduction that I used. I used Give and Take sort of first chapter structure. So like one of the things to do over the next week or so is go to the library or go to the bookstore and find sort of a structure that you like, a book that you like that you want yours to be like. All right, so let me walk you through a little bit of how you would actually fill this out. So I'm going to use an example from Sergio Pianco. He is creating a manuscript sort of on the future of how we will create the next great political candidate. So he talks a little bit about the kind of like book structure, and I'll talk a little bit about these book structures in a minute here, what they are. But he basically laid out what is his book structure and his book model. He wants to sort of copy it on some of these for different types. The Start with Why, The Quiet, The Power of Introverts, Big Picture. So these are book models he'd like his to be like, and he wrote out his big idea. Our desire for entertainment is transforming our world and our political process for the worse. And I hope the new generation can leverage the fame in this way. So part of his book is saying that like Donald Trump was elected because we want to be entertained, but like that's not good. Is there a way for us to make that more positive? So is there a way that we can create positive candidates while also still entertaining? So that's kind of like the big idea of his book. He then sort of uses these pieces here to kind of lay those parts out. That's sort of his thoughts. Then he sort of like starts to structure. He sort of said, okay, like here's some of the stories I have. So he's got these parts: the world today, the new game of politics, the spheres of infants who can lead, and then the conclusion. So he sort of breaks this down, and then he kind of lays out some of the stories based on what he thinks could be a chapter. So Men We Admire, the state of America, this tension, evolution. So he sort of like starts to organize his book in that way. So these are pieces of his structure. Again, those are the parts that he had. And then these are basically the sort of chapters that he has. And then he links to some of the stories that he wants to link to in that front. So again, I'll put some examples of how to actually structure these ones from a couple other authors that we've done already. But you'll be able to get a sense of how to actually build out your structural plan this way. And that's one of the things I want you, this process shouldn't take you particularly long. It's probably about an hour time that you want to invest in it. But this is sort of the structure to sort of do that one. So I'm going to pause there for just a second. And what I want you guys to do is basically spend the next 10 minutes or so between now and sort of 6:45 laying out the first parts of that document. So if you look at this sort of document here that I have in this template, I want you to see if you can fill out your primary audience, the reasons they want to do your book, the big idea, skip the book structure, but see any book models, and then see if you have any ideas yet about the parts of your book. Take a first stab at it, and we'll come back together and chat about it. And I'm going to put a couple examples in the folder for you guys as well at this time. But I want you guys to spend about the next sort of 10 minutes or so just taking the first stab at it, and then we'll get back together and kind of talk about it for a minute. Sound all right, Carson?
Sounds good. Let me know if you guys have any questions.
I have a quick question about the primary audience.
Absolutely.
So I know obviously, like, we're not saying that we only want that group, people from that group to read the book, but is it supposed to be, like, are we supposed to be targeting a pretty niche group for that purpose, for the primary audience, or like how specific should the group be, I guess?
The question that I would sort of guess pose back to you is this idea of like, who do you think, if you sent this book to, could open those doors for you related to the outcomes you want, right? So if your goal is, for example, if your goal is to wind up getting to be able to appear on, I don't know, sort of to do workshops with people, and you want to work with certain organizations, nonprofit organizations, narrow it on those sorts of people, but be thoughtful about who can help you get where you kind of want to go in this sort of process. And I think that will help you a little bit. So again, you can sort of put multiple pieces underneath it. I wouldn't sort of worry too much about necessarily like that way. But yeah, I think that's kind of the way I would think about it, is like, just be as specific as you can. And you can always put secondary things like also these people here, but think about who do you most want to mail this out to, I guess is what I would say.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And I just sort of shared this a little bit. They're in this folder here under the R sessions tab. So if you look under, the R sessions, and then you look under draft table of contents, the overall book structure, I've put several examples for you. So, to this question about like how specific or not specific, you can see these are a few of the authors that have recently published or working on it. So I think, Maddie's is a good example. She kind of has this like, trends that she wants to look at. She talks about some of the structuring behind it a little bit. So these pieces here. So, these are some of the main themes that she wanted to cover. She sort of used it in this way. It was her example of how she sort of structured it. Sergio's, I just sort of shared with you a little bit some of these pieces. So I'll keep posting a few other examples in here for you to see. I think Claire's is a pretty good example that I'll click on here when it opens for me a little bit. But she basically, used this as sort of a way to kind of start to come up with a structure, and then we'll basically collaborate on this back and forth. There's a couple different examples in here that I think could be pretty helpful for you.
Can you go into a little bit more detail about like the book structure? So like the differences between like a thought leader, like some of these like phrases don't necessarily like.
Yeah, so that'll be something that I'll send you a separate video to dive into. It's a little bit of a longer thing that we don't quite have time here to do, but each one of them are slightly different takes on things. So I'll send you a video on that one to watch with a few more details on that. For now, don't worry too much about that one quite yet.
Cool.
So skip that one when you're writing it. You can leave that one blank for now.
Just a couple more minutes, guys, before we go to the next thing. All right, I think maybe move on to the next thing.
Perfect. So what do you guys think? Any initial thoughts on filling this stuff out? How's it feel? Like, any questions or comments on as you're starting to populate these sorts of things?
I mean, I personally thought it was easier than I thought it would be, but still I feel like I could add a lot. But yeah.
Yeah. And that's sort of the design of it is, I think, as you dive into it a little more, as you start to look at other books, you'll start to go back through all these pieces and see. So the idea is really to not overthink it, to put together a first pass of what you think this looks like. And then again, tag me and your developmental editor on it for some initial feedback on how you might structure this. This is one, I'll tell you, this is one that I could be very helpful on you. So like seeing a lot of structures, it's sort of like as we brainstorm your ideas, put together like a first pass of what you think the structure this could look like. Tag me on it and you'll get some initial feedback on it. What else? Other thoughts on it? Someone else has to have other thoughts, right? Come on now. I feel like Peyton has thoughts.
Well, I'm a big Malcolm Gladwell fan, and I love his books. So when I see for book structure, I definitely would love to follow one of his. But since you read a lot of books and know about all of our book structures, when we do pick a structure, will you come in and be like, okay, this is how it is outlined, like the 7 story outlines that you made, or is it all just universal?
No, I mean, that's right. So basically, like, that's kind of what the design of this is to take a first stab at it. And then I will look at it and say, like, hey, maybe you think about this one or that one. One of the things that I'll show you that we'll actually do next week is we're going to actually walk through and take a bunch of chapter structures that I've deconstructed for you and say, hey, yeah, Peyton, your content may actually fit better into, you know, an Angela Duckworth framework or a Brene Brown framework or whoever they are. So I actually think that Maggie's may be a Brene Brown. My just prediction on it already based on what you've read. Same with Julia. You guys both may have Brene Brown structures just based on what I've read of your guys' work. So anyway, those are sort of things that we'll do. And so part of it is by understanding what you've got, where you want this to go, who you're inspired by, will kind of help come up with a structure that I think pulls this stuff all together for you.
Thank you.
Other questions at all? All right. So let me take you to the last couple things here. I'm going to blaze through it, and then I'll give you guys some, you know, sort of some time to keep chatting, thinking, stuff like that on it. And again, feel free to ask me questions along the way. This is sort of meant to be sort of a collaborative process. So I'm going to go through this sort of quickly, just a little bit to talk about the structure. I'll put some videos out there for you guys a little bit, but I want to quickly talk about book structures and book models in these two places. So the book model part of this here, piece of it is like, again, one of the things that I've found is that when you're writing a book, it's way better to not try and start from scratch. So you're going to look for models you like. And again, to Peyton's question, I really like Malcolm Gladwell. Awesome. Put that down, pick one of his books and say, this is one of the book models. It doesn't mean that your content is the same. It's just that you really like that book. You like the style of it. You like the way that it's written. You like the way people talk about it. Even if it's not directly related to your content, that is okay. So for me, again, as I sort of shared, I picked these 4 books, and I literally had them sitting on the side of my desk, and I would pull them out when I was stuck and sort of trying to structure things. So we'll talk more about it, but one of the things I would recommend to all of you to do is actually go to the bookstore. Look for some books, look at what you have, see what books you're inspired by, and sort of use that as a model, just to give you something to not start from scratch on. You can find things too if you want to look at templates of it. I have a Blinkist account if you want to borrow it, or you can do it. It's kind of like Cliff Notes version today. But find a book model. And again, how do you find a book model? Well, go out there and find, some structures that you like in these books and sort of read the introduction, skim a few pages, look at the parts of it, see if there's a structure in that book that you admire and can learn from. Again, you're just sort of gleaning from those pieces to do it. So again, Peyton did exactly the right thing, just saying like, I really like this particular author, these books, so great. Use that as one of the potential book models you may use. You're going to have lots of them, but you're going to basically be using that as a way to sort of think about it. So find one of those and use it as a way to decide what you like and what you don't like, right? I'll tell you, like, I really didn't like some of the back chapters in Grit, so I didn't use that, right? I didn't use that stuff, but I really didn't like Adam Grant's introduction, but I liked a lot of the stuff from Simon Sinek's Start With Why. It's just a way for you to have some places to crib from structurally to know how you can wind up writing this in that way. So in terms of the specific book structure, and I think this is one of the things that Maggie asked about, is like, what are the different types of books that you can write? I'm going to send a video on this one, but I want to go through it fairly quickly to give you a sense of some of the different sort of types of books that you all might be writing a little bit in this way. So there's sort of 9 kind of types, I'll call them, of book structures that we see pretty commonly. And your book may be a mashup of these different ones, but these are sort of the 9 types that I see pretty commonly. It's a how-to book, it's a thought leadership book, an interview book, a memoir book, a big idea, list book, parable, a age sort of take on, like a new look at, like, millennials take on, or a Gen Z take on, and then a new technology plus industry. So I'm gonna give you some examples of them, and again, I'll post these slides so you have them as well. But a how-to book is sort of what it sounds like. It's sort of a generally like more of a how-to, like, step-by-step guide to this one. And so if you think about your book and you're describing it to someone, you say like, here's how to, that's how you do it. Oftentimes these can be really good if you've got kind of a service-based business or a consulting business you want to do. So Nico's book, which is about guerrilla marketing and some of the marketing techniques, may be a good fit into that one, like how to do some of those pieces of it in that way. So if there's something you really want to teach that's sort of step-by-step based, or something that's more of a process that you want to do, that can really fit into it. And here's a couple quick examples of these sorts of books that we've done. How to become an excellent server, how to find the next Messi or Ronaldo in India, which is 1.3 billion, how to succeed in the growing game of lacrosse here, how to make it in hip hop. They oftentimes will have how to in the subtitle in that way. And again, they can be a little more targeted in this way. So here's Adrian's, which is aimed at how to hack college. So it's aimed at college students, or here's how to be an introvert in college. Those are sort of 2 different bends on these sorts of things. The thought leadership book is slightly different. It's sort of not as much how-to, but more of the way you describe it is I believe, and kind of this way you want to make a case for something in this way. So I believe blank, something's happening. So a couple of examples that I'll share with you. These are, again, tend to fit well if you've got kind of an entrepreneurial bent to your business, or to your book. So I've got Adapter, which is sort of, her book was on why basically doing expat career choices for women is a good way for them to accelerate into leadership. Jacqueline's book, The Cusp Method, is about nutrition, and Sugar Games is a book about the future of sort of like why sports athletes are actually playing into this whole sugar, sort of crisis and addiction we have. And so, for Beatrice, she's using this to create an organization. Jacqueline's an entrepreneur, and Nick has a side hustle. So thought leadership books can be really good if you have a business venture you're linking up to, or you'd like to link up to your book. That can sometimes be a good fit there. An interview book is really where you're structuring this primarily driven by the interview. So you should hear the stories of blank is a good way to think about it. Again, not right or wrong, but just, again, tends to be that where it's really driven by stories, and you want to make sure that's at the core of it. So a good example of this one is Marin's book, where she profiled 19 women who happen to be at the top of the game in sort of a sport of some sort. So the best mountain climber or the best kayaker and things like that happen to be women. So these were some of the stories that she driven in the interview book. A memoir is a book that is mostly driven by your story. So about 50% or more of the book is your story in it. Again, typically there's lots of other stories incorporated as well, but the memoir is driven in that way. And so a couple different examples, Ricky Paredez's book, The Immigrant, and Place Wilson's book, A Person Named Place, where Place details how she was able to manage her own mental health issues, depression, anxiety through the book or through people watching and emotional intelligence. So these are memoir books. That's another type of a structure. A big idea book is really, again, Malcolm Gladwell is probably somewhat of a good example in these ones, but Seth Godin's Tribe, Made to Stick by the Heath brothers. These are basically very simple concepts that try and present something big in a way that we can get behind in that way. So some examples of these ones, 2 books that we've done here are Universal Housing, which basically says universal basic income, which is the idea of paying people, doesn't necessarily will never work, but in Julia's case, she makes the argument that we instead should be thinking about the big idea here of making universal housing as the way that we sort of pay people in that way, because universal basic income isn't politically attainable. And then Divine's book, A Revolutionary Connectivity, is a book about understanding how she makes the case that universal Wi-Fi or universal internet access is the single most important human right, because it enables all the other human rights. So it's sort of a big idea that she paints behind it. And again, simple to sort of like get to say, but it takes a lot of explaining in terms of why. List books are oftentimes an interesting type of book where you are able to take something that maybe is complicated and break it down into a smaller number of chunks, so maybe 40 or 7 or 12, something like that, but it's sort of these maybe not quite as much of an organization sort of holding them all together, but there's digestible chunks in it. So these are like Tim Ferriss books is a good way to think about these ones, but 10 Ways Up is where Catherine breaks down how women were able to become CEOs. Like there's only like a small number of women become Fortune 500 CEOs. So she studied their path and offered 10 paths that they'd taken to get there. And then Antonia's book, Hack College Like an Entrepreneur, took a bunch of interviews of people who became entrepreneurs but didn't drop out of college and understood what they did in college, and then breaks it into sort of 40 smaller nuggets that she shares in that way. So that's a list book. A parable book, we don't see a lot of these ones, but they tend to be where you sort of, there's a fiction-y element to it. So a good example here is Teaching Player One, where Nico basically set a sort of a fictional story in the future where he looked at how virtual reality would transform education in the future. And so that was kind of a parable book in that way. Age Take On is sort of a look that looks at something through a particular age lens. So Gen Z look at it, Boomer look at it, Millennial look at. A couple examples here, Millennials Guide to Investing, how marketers can reach the next generation, and then how millennials are rewriting sports marketing. So these are those types of books where you're looking at it through an age-specific bend to it. And then New Technology for X. This looks at a technology and looks at the impact on an industry. So a couple examples here, Game Changer, which is how augmented reality will change sports, how 3D printing will transform fashion, and how sensors will transform fashion. Those are sort of examples on that front there. So these are the 9 structures. Again, they're just guides for you to look at, and sometimes you can look at them to say, this is the structure I want, or here's a way that I can fit these together. You may want to combine things. Who knows exactly what you want to do with them, but they can be a powerful tool for you to understand kind of what is the structure of it. And so take a stab at what you think it is, whether it's a mashup of those pieces on that front. So that's the big stuff that I want to cover. I'll have a video that kind of goes into this in a little bit more detail for you. But any questions on book models or structures, that kind of answer the question, Maggie, a little bit for you, like high level of what those sorts of things are. But cool. And again, I have a video with more detail, but I wanted to at least give you a picture of what these pieces are. They're not meant to be rigid, mostly meant to give you an idea of how you can find books similar to yours. So questions on these at all?
I have a quick question.
Absolutely.
So I am a little bit confused. I'm going through like the different, and I thought those were really helpful how you said there's all these different kinds of books. I feel like maybe either my brain is all over the place because there's so much I want to write, and everybody goes, Julia, like, you don't have to put everything in at once. But from my stories, I'm writing a lot about, I'm trying to explain how we could reframe vulnerability pretty much and how to make it a more positive term. And I'm using a lot of examples in my own life, but then examples from my friends and from people I look up to, and that people have shown me that they could be vulnerable as well. So it's not exactly a memoir because it's a lot of different examples, but it almost seems too scattered to fall into one category. So I just wanted to see if you had any advice for someone who's like really not clear on like how their model would look.
It's so you're not alone. Everyone's book is there's never a book that's a perfect fit into one of these ones. But again, you have elements of one. You've described it. You probably have something that's a sort of a big idea book is like reframing vulnerability. And the other part of it is memoir elements of it. You have your own story in it. So that would be a good fit in that one. Or thought leadership is if you want to sort of think about how you could wind up teaching these in that sort of way. But don't let the fact that these are just sort of ways for you to start to structure this feel like, oh gosh, like my book doesn't have a structure. It's just some guides for you to understand that you will start to find like there are books that are fit into these veins in those sorts of ways. But you're not alone. Like many times when people write it, they say, I feel like my book is a bit of memoir, a book of thought leadership, and a big idea. So that's good. Like it's fine. You'll find elements inspire you in that way. It's just helping you start to say, what do I want my house to look like? Is it a rambler? Is it a 2-story one? Or is it like my own little kind of weird mashup in that way? That's perfectly fine.
And like kind of going off of that, I don't know if a lot of, like, because I know there are some people on here doing like personal stories where you threw out theirs. Do you have any advice? So whenever we're answering the questions on the manuscript copy and kind of going about how we frame our book, do you have any advice on how we could frame our book in a way that it's not all about me, for example? So like I'm not doubting my ability to like be a change leader in this world, but like who's going to care if they hear, oh, Julia Ruggiero, they're really going to grab that book off the shelf. So how do we kind of like weave our personal experiences in our big idea? Like how do we use interviews?
Stop, pause.
Yeah.
Not yet. Next week we'll talk about chapter structures.
Oh, perfect.
You're trying to write the whole book. Right now, just take what you got and structure it. Next week we'll talk about how to actually use existing book structures and fit the right elements into it to make sure it's compelling. Because most of us have never written a book chapter before. So like what you're trying to say here is like, I don't know how to write all the stuff I've got.
Mm-hmm.
Normal. So I'm going to teach you how to find, okay, here's a couple different like chapter structures. And what they figure out how to do is make a compelling case by saying personal story, interview story, research, and these pieces by stitching them together. That's what we're doing next week in terms of creating your first draft chapter. So you're right where you want to be. For now, worry about sort of this document. And then next week, we'll talk about how to actually take all that you've got and make it into a compelling chapter for a book in that way.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. You're right where I'd expect you to be, being like, is anyone going to care? And right now, don't worry about that yet. Just worry about like what you think this should look like. And then next week, what we'll be doing is figuring out how to actually teach you how to write in chapter format, which is not natural for most of us. We're going to teach you how to do it by not trying to write it, but by trying to borrow other structures and then fill in the blanks that you have as you go.
Cool. Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. There we go, guys. We are 1 week in to this stuff. So again, the goal of this basically by, over the next like 4 or 5 days or so, put together a first draft chapter structure. Don't overthink it. You shouldn't spend any more than about an hour more on this one. Put something out there and then send it to me, tag me and your developmental editor on it for feedback, and then just keep cranking. You guys are doing exactly what we should be doing. Then next week, I'll be sending you a couple videos to watch on how to develop chapters and then also how to start to talk about how we pull this whole thing together into our first draft chapters. Cool.
All right, awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. I guess have a happy new year. Keep cranking out the words. Any questions before we go? All right, cool.
Bye, everybody.
All right. See you guys.